There's no denying that the western part of the United States has been a frequent destination for Travelhound road trips over the years. With its stunning landscapes, amazing national parks, and bountiful assortment of roadside attractions, there's plenty of reasons to go west. But the eastern part of the U.S. has its share of travel-worthy destinations as well. So, in the summer of 2016, we decided to head to one of the most picturesque regions of the East Coast, New England. In this episode, we'll show you some of the attractions we visited while driving through New Hampshire and Vermont, including a 45-acre outdoor museum, a stay in a unique Airbnb, and even a performing bear. After our adventures in Maine, we crossed over into New Hampshire and headed for our next destination, Franconia Notch State Park. Located in the heart of the White Mountain National Forest, Franconia Notch is perhaps most well known as being the home of the famous Old Man of the Mountain, an outcropping of rock that hung from Cannon Mountain, resembling the profile of an elderly man's face. Ever since its discovery way back in 1805, it has been an iconic symbol for the state of New Hampshire. But in the early morning hours of May 3, 2003, the iconic profile collapsed. For many New Hampshireites, the loss of their beloved old man was equivalent to a death in the family. Since that fateful day, a memorial named Profiler Plaza has been built to commemorate the old man. Today, visitors to Franconia Notch State Park can see the old man's profile through a series of steel rods that point toward the cliff where the old man used to reside. Each rod has a series of irregular shapes at the top of them. When visitors align themselves with the shapes, they can view what the face profile would have looked like if it were still there. And while the old man on the mountain may be gone, he still lives on as New Hampshire's icon on both their state quarter and as the graphic background for their state's license plate. But alas, I digress. Our real reason for visiting Franconia Notch State Park was to hike the Flume Gorge Trail. Reminiscent of the Gorge Trail at Watkins Glen State Park, this trail threads its way through an 800-foot-long gorge sandwiched between 90-foot walls of granite that, in some places, are no more than 12 feet apart. The walkway so closely parallels the brook coursing through the gorge that you'll occasionally feel the spray from its cascading water. Even on a hot summer day, it's a relatively easy hike, since temperatures inside of the gorge can be 20 degrees cooler, thanks to the cooling mists and the forest canopy. And while the gorge is the highlight of this trail, there are other unique features to see along the way as well. This is Table Rock, a 500-foot long slab of granite covered by a shallow veil of cascading water. And while it's certainly tempting to want to slide down this natural water slide, numerous signs along the trail clearly warn against it. Not that those warnings mean anything to illiterate Darwinian knuckleheads who think that the rules don't apply to them. Oh look, there go two right now! You also cross the Flume-covered bridge. Built in 1886, it spans the Pemigewasset River and is the oldest covered bridge in the state. After Franconia Notch, a short trip down Interstate 93 brought us to the town of Lincoln, where we spent the night in one of the coolest Airbnbs we've ever stayed in. This is the Lil Red Caboose, a decommissioned caboose that has been converted into a cozy Airbnb. Inside, there's a combined kitchenette and living room area, complete with an electric fireplace, I might add, a full bath with just enough room to turn around in, and a bedroom with a queen bed. And while the accommodations are best suited for 2 people, there is room for a 3rd and 4th guest as well, with a pulled-out couch bed in the living room and a single bed perched high up in the cabooses cupola. I'm not sure how we lucked out on reserving this unique Airbnb, but it gets an enthusiastic 2 calls up from Travelhound. The next morning, we left our cozy Airbnb and headed just a few miles down the road to our next destination, Clark's Trading Post. Opened as a tiny roadside attraction by Florence and Ed Clark way back in 1928, Clark's has grown into a popular tourist destination in New Hampshire's White Mountains. Remarkably, almost 100 years later, it is still owned and run by the Clarks, now well into their 5th generation of family members. The majority of Clark's Trading Post is a recreation of a turn-of-the-20th century Main Street that houses several different historically themed museums. Inside of Avery's garage is a collection of motoring memorabilia, as well as antique autos. Right up the street is the 1884 Hook and Ladder Fire Station that houses antiquities like a horse-drawn fire engine and a ladder truck. And inside of the Americana Museum, you'll find everything from fully restored player pianos to unique artifacts from a bygone era. In addition to the recreated Main Street, there's a modest assortment of family-friendly rides as well, including a water slide, blaster boats, and a Segway experience. But undoubtedly, Clark's 2 biggest attractions are their bear shows and steam-powered train rides. In 1949, brothers Edward and Murray Clark added a trained bear show to their lineup in an effort to attract more tourists. For the next 54 years, Murray performed with the show bears until he turned the reins over to 2 of his children, Murray and Maureen Clark. The half-hour shows occur periodically throughout the day and feature native black bears dancing, swinging, and rolling their way into audiences' hearts. And now, for your viewing pleasure, we present to you a sampling of the adorable skills of the Clark's Bears.
And every time we wave a ring, I suddenly get a headache. I'll have to pause for a moment while she remembers the script. And every time I get a headache during the show, Tula heads over to that blue first aid cabinet, and just like Florence Nightingale, she always pulls out the Bear aspirin. Those other brands just won't do. Now for the tough part. Would you please take that and put it back in the cabinet? But this time, put it in on the left side. Then close the door to keep the small children out. She knows her left from her right. She went to school here in Lincoln. Look out, world, here she comes. Now you watch out for pedestrians. Use your turn signals. No texting and driving. Well, she has a BlackBerry. We'll make it interesting. Detour ahead. Bear right. And only one small part of her anatomy will show up at the bunghole. See that? She's eating ice cream right through the barrel. Have you ever seen such a thing in your life? That's the only time the ice cream is truly safe. All the bears Tony, that's right. Oh boy, she says. No, they're all still here. Yep. Just because you couldn't hear them laughing or clapping doesn't mean they left yet. I'll be the chauffeur, Maureen will be the handmaiden. And I call this one Driving Miss Daisy. Well, folks, what did you think of our little friend Tula? Didn't she do a wonderful job? Oh, we're so proud of her. And that, my friends, is the Bear Show, the very best that we could do.
While Murray was primarily in charge of the bear shows, his brother Edward was instrumental in developing the White Mountain Central Railroad at Clark's. In the early 1950s, Edward began rescuing old steam locomotives from scrapyards and gave them a second life at the trading post. Today, those restored locomotives continue to take park visitors on excursions through the nearby woods of the White Mountains. However, on our train ride, we had no idea that something totally unexpected was waiting for us just beyond the covered bridge. Yes, that's right. It was Wolfman, an angry, one-eyed, bearskin-clad Neanderthal who, apparently, has been chasing down the train for decades. A longtime resident of these woods, Wolfman provided comic relief during our ride by attempting to scare us away from his secret mining operation for the precious mineral unobtainium.
Like this fuse right here is infused and blow you up! Blow up the train! That's a 100-kiloton bomb! Just listen, here goes!
Fortunately, Wolfman's plan to blow up the train was foiled at the last moment by a well-placed release of steam from the locomotive. Whew! That was a close one. Having more fun than humans should be allowed, we left New Hampshire and headed west to the tiny town of Shelburn, Vermont, home of the Shelburn Museum. If the Smithsonian is considered our nation's attic, then the Shelburn could very well be our nation's backyard. Its 45-acre campus is comprised of 39 different historical structures, each one filled with collections of history, art, and design that are uniquely American. Founded in 1947 by Electra Havmeyer-Webb, the Shelburn was originally a place to preserve her family's collection of horse-drawn carriages. Before long, however, she realized that she had a rare opportunity to create what she described as a collection of collections. So Electra began finding historic buildings from the New England and New York countrysides and relocated them to the museum grounds. But she didn't stop there. She filled each of the buildings with unique collections. From toys and miniatures to taxidermied animals and apothecary medications, the Shelburn Museum has more than 100,000 items on display. One of the collections that really stood out to us was housed in the Circus Building, a horseshoe-shaped building that featured a 500-foot-long hand-carved miniature circus parade. The 1-inch to 1-foot scale miniature is comprised of 4,000 figures that include clowns, animals, and even dragons? Equally impressive was a miniature 3-ring circus. Believe it or not, it took artist Edgar Kirk 40 years to hand-carve the 3,500 pieces that make up his diorama. And there's a massive collection of hand-painted carousel figures made by the renowned Gustav Denzel Carousel Company. Of course, no tour of this nostalgic collection would be complete without a ride on the working carousel just outside of the circus building. Another collection that surprisingly captured our interest was a temporary exhibition of quilts at the weaving shop. While quilts aren't something that I usually gravitate to unless I'm feeling a little chilly in bed, a display by textile artist Dominique Ehrman took my appreciation of the art form to a totally new level. Dominique's quilts challenged my limited perception that quilts just lay on beds and look pretty. Her Come and Follow Me quilt is theatrical in nature, using forced perspective to draw you into the quilt. Look closely and you can see how the multiple panels in the quilt gives it the look of a pop-up book. Another one of her quilts, Serenity, employs a similar 3D effect, while beautifully capturing both her love for the woods and quilting. Apparently, Dominique and her husband are also avid road trippers who travel for long stretches around Canada in their motorhome. While he loves fly fishing and wild mountain streams during these trips, Dominique enjoys constructing her quilts outdoors with nature as her backdrop, thanks in part to a solar-powered sewing machine that he made for her. The Serenity quilt not only captures the beauty of these natural settings, but if you look closely enough, you'll even see fabric representations of Dominique hard at work at her sewing machine and her husband fishing in a mountain stream. As the quilt's name implies, this is their Serenity. My favorite exhibit at the Shelburn, however, had to be the fully restored 220-foot-long Ticonderoga Steamboat. For the first half of the 20th century, the Ticonderoga operated as a dayboat on nearby Lake Champlain, ferrying passengers back and forth from Westport to St. Albans, as well as Burlington to Port Kent. Instead of a traditional paddle wheel at the back of the boat, it used side paddle wheels that were powered by a vertical beam engine, courtesy of 2 coal-fired boilers. But in 1953, unable to compete with much faster diesel ferries and the popularity of the automobile, the Ticonderoga sailed for the last time. Fortunately, Electra Webb purchased the steamboat for $20,000, had it loaded onto a flatbed railroad car pulled by freight trucks, and relocated it 2 miles inland to the Shelburn Museum, where it is now permanently moored. Guests at the Shelburn are free to explore every inch of the Ticonderoga. On the top deck is the pilot house, which features 2 steering wheels. If the smaller steering wheel seen on the left lost power, they could use the much larger steering wheel as a backup. On the salon deck, no expense was spared in evoking the elegance of steamboat travel back in the day. Even though excursions on Ticonderoga were only day trips, there was a dining room as well as staterooms for those passengers who didn't want to rub elbows with the more common folks on the boat. The main deck of the boat was used to transport oversized items such as freight, cars, and livestock. And at the bottom of the boat, the engine deck contained a full-size galley that was used for the preparation of the food that was served in the dining room. The collection of buildings and exhibits at the Shelburn Museum is so extensive, I've barely even scratched the surface. If you plan a visit, be sure to allow yourself a full day because you're going to need it. Before leaving Vermont, we had to make an obligatory stop in nearby Waterbury to take a tour of the Ben & Jerry's ice cream factory. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 45 years, you're probably familiar with their oddball flavors of ice cream, with clever names that pay tribute to everything from musicians and talk show hosts to social and political causes. It all started back in 1978 when Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield completed a $5 correspondence course on ice cream making and opened their first ice cream scoop shop in a renovated gas station in Burlington, Vermont. In addition to a tour of the factory, visitors can explore the surrounding grounds that include some of the company's artifacts, like this replica of the Cowmobile that Ben & Jerry drove across the U.S. to distribute free scoops of ice cream. My favorite part, however, was visiting the flavor graveyard. Over the years, Ben & Jerry's has introduced over 130 different ice cream flavors. And while many have continued to live on, 35 have been retired due to either lack of popularity or limited runs. And when that happens, they are memorialized in a vacant lot behind the factory. Here now is remembrance of some of those flavors that have come and gone. Oh, pear. Fresh pear ice cream with a hint of almond and a light fudge swirl. Miss Jelina's sweet potato pie. Ginger ice cream also with a fudge swirl. peanut butter and jelly, peanut butter ice cream with peanut butter bits and strawberry jelly, Tennessee mud, coffee ice cream with amaretto, Jack Daniel's whiskey, and roasted slivered almonds, and sweaty balls, vanilla ice cream and fudge-covered rum with malt balls. Our New England road trip was filled with so many opportunities to experience both natural beauty and unique attractions. As with any trip, however, there's never enough time to do everything that each state has to offer. And that was certainly the case with New Hampshire and Vermont. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like it, and become a subscriber by clicking on the button in the lower right-hand corner, so that you never miss out on Travelhound's upcoming adventures.